Hello, everyone. I'm doing a practice version of this presentation, which I'm going to give next week. Uh, and I've got to get it in under 15 minutes. I should start my timer. I don't think the actual presentation will start like this, but okay. Starting the timer, I got 15 minutes. I'm supposed to leave 10 minutes for questions at the end, so I guess I can actually go a little longer than 15 minutes. But so this is a presentation on a study that I did of undergraduate syllabi, where I put them into a big glob of text called a corpus. Glob is not a technical word, but corpus is. And I used a piece of software to analyze them and then came to some conclusions about what makes syllabi difficult to read. And you can see in the bottom left corner here, I teach in the American Language and Culture Center at Southern Utah University. That's an intensive English program, so my students are almost all international students, and we prepare them for their undergraduate or graduate programs by giving them a very intensive English course. I guess that's implied by the name. Anyway, so I approach this from a linguistic standpoint and also from a pedagogical standpoint, thinking of what an international student needs to know before they start their undergraduate or graduate programs. Let's start with a little bit of an eye-opening exercise. Say you had some English language learners in your class, and you were charged with teaching them how to understand a sentence. So, you're acting as English teachers in this scenario. Say this were the sentence. Students with medical, psychological, learning, or other disabilities desiring academic adjustments, accommodations, or auxiliary aids will need to contact the Southern Utah University Coordinator of Services for Students with Disabilities. It's quite dense, right? It's dense with vocabulary. And if you were trying to teach this to a group of international students whose first language was something other than English, you probably would be okay starting with vocabulary, just like, what do all these words mean, right? It's quite dense. I don't know what the Lexile rating of this sentence is, but I imagine it's pretty high. Lexile is like the one measure of a piece of text difficulty in terms of the words that are in it. You could also approach it from a top-down approach, like what is the purpose of this kind of sentence to begin with in the kind of document that it's usually seen in, right? So you could start with the fact that a sentence like this is not just information. It's supposed to be read as a command for students in this situation, that if they want to get the things that they are entitled to as a student with a disability, they have to do X, Y, and Z, right? In this case, they have to consult a particular office, right? So knowing that makes some of the word choices a little bit more understandable. Like, we'll need to contact is basically telling people, hey, you reading this, you should contact this office, right? It's not just a prediction about the future, which will sometimes is, right? As a very nuts and bolts bottom-up grammar approach to the sentence, you could also start with the fact that the subject is very, very long. This is all part of one clause. It's not even the end of the clause yet, but this is all part of one clause in a pretty orthodox standard English sentence that just happens to have a very long subject, right? Everything until will is part of the subject here. And, your more grammatically precocious students will find that interesting. Not everybody, but yeah. Anyway, it's kind of a nightmare as a sentence goes, to try to teach a sentence like this. It's the kind of sentence where you could dedicate multiple whole days to it, right? There's no end to the things that you could talk about with this sentence. Anyway, and spoiler alert, as you probably have guessed, this is the kind of sentence that our students are expected to read the first day of their classes in their undergraduate or graduate programs. Even in the IEP, we still give them syllabi, and the syllabi include sentences like this because they're required to by the university, right? So, imagine seeing a sentence that's the equivalent of this kind of sentence in Chinese as you're an international student in China taking your first class in Chinese. It would be pretty difficult to understand. Anyway, so two puzzles that I was trying to solve by doing this study were, what are the purposes of syllabi from a top-down perspective, and does it behoove us to explain that to students explicitly? And then also, what are the bottom-up concerns in syllabi? What are the words that are very likely to appear on syllabi? What are the grammatical patterns that are likely to appear? And to accomplish this, I did a what's called a corpus study in, let's see, within linguistics. There's a subfield called corpus linguistics, which is basically studies of large amounts of linguistic data. In my case, I compiled a bunch of undergraduate syllabi and used a piece of software to parse them. The piece of software is called a concordancer. In my case, it was one called AntConc, which is available for free. And that can yield some insights that a human reader wouldn't be able to find easily. For example, what is the most common word? It's really hard to figure out that kind of thing by hand. Or what is the most common word after the, right? That's another thing that's pretty hard to figure out by hand, but a computer can do very easily. So that's what corpus linguistics is really all about. And so I did this for syllabi. I parsed the syllabi with a piece of software to find, patterns in the language. And then I compared the results to two other corpora is the plural of corpus, two other collections of language data to see how syllabi were different from those collections. So my collection, again, I'm going to call the syllabus corpus. It's 19 undergraduate syllabi, maximum of one per course, maximum of one per instructor, all gathered from my university. And that includes 37,000 or more than 37,000 tokens. Tokens are just individual things that the concordancer finds. Usually they're just words. Compared to COCA, which is a large online free corpus that's called the Corpus of Contemporary American English. And it includes more than 1 billion tokens. It's really, really huge, and it's been maintained for quite a long time. And includes all genres of language, of English usage, not language, but English in particular, including television, movies, magazines, fiction, things like that. And then also specifically COCA, just the academic genre. So COCA has, as I said, several different genres in it. You can just search the academic genre if you want to. And the academic genre of COCA is mostly academic journals, a few like law reviews and things like that. So again, I was looking for notable differences between the syllabi and then these more general use corpora. So basically, the results were the same, whether you're looking at individual words or verb forms. Let's see, I'm mostly, I think, talking to a non-ESL audience here. So when we say verb forms, we mean for a verb like play, does it occur more often in its infinitive form, which is play, or as a to infinitive, to play, or a past participle played, past tense played. Those look the same for a lot of verbs. Present participle or gerund, playing, or the third person singular present plays. That's what we mean by verb forms. And multi-word chunks are just groups of words that often come together. Anyway, regardless of which of these three you're looking at, all show evidence of lexical bottlenecks, which is a technical term, meaning you need particular words in order to understand the larger document, in order to understand the sentence, or in order to understand the story. For example, if you were trying to read Moby Dick and you didn't know the word whale, it would be a lexical bottleneck. You wouldn't really be able to understand much of the story without that. Okay, and basically these, whether you're looking at words or verb forms or multi-word chunks, there are a few words, verb forms, or chunks that are way overrepresented in syllabi compared to other similar words, or compared to the other corpora that I looked at. Okay. So understanding syllabi requires knowledge of just a few of these words that are vastly overrepresented on syllabi, and then also the higher order purposes of syllabi, which are mainly as contracts in order to make sense of the lower order common words, verb forms, and chunks. Okay, I've got a picture of a bottleneck in case you've never seen one before. So here are this is just a sample of the results. As you can see, the verb require occurs in one particular form on syllabi. Syllabi is the blue bar here. First of all, much more common than the other forms of require. Secondly, much more common than in either COCA academic or all genres across COCA, COCA being the other corpora that I looked at, right? So you see the same thing across different, oh yeah, here's some examples. And you see the same thing for individual words. Some of these you would expect to be more common on syllabi, and the bottleneck doesn't present much of a problem because students are very likely to know what a grade is by the time they finish the intensive English program and start their undergraduate years. Concepts is a bit of a higher level vocabulary word. Again, students will probably know this when they're done with the program, but still it's notable that reading widely on academic subjects won't necessarily prepare one for just how common this word is on syllabi, right? For individual verb forms, these are the most common verbs in the syllabus corpus. You see the same pattern. The ones that are common are much, much, much more common than than other verb forms for the same verb, and also much more common on syllabi than in other genres, including academic writing. Right. So again, academic writing in general doesn't necessarily prepare you well for reading syllabi. Here's some examples of these, the sentences that might include these words in the forms that they're listed in here. So, and for multi-word units, you see the same thing. Multi-word units we call chunks. That is actually a technical word in linguistics. Some of them, again, you're not surprised by. By the end of this course, you would understand that that would be common across syllabi, and then not so common across other genres of English. Now, some of them are less obvious in why they're extremely common on syllabi, and they help tie together the higher order concerns we had with syllabi and the lower order concerns. So in order to understand will be able to in the context that it's usually presented in a syllabus, you really have to understand that a syllabus is intended as a contract. And the will be able to statements are usually from the learning outcomes of the course. And they're things that the students will be evaluated on. So a way that students should read will be able to statements is more like commands rather than as predictions, which, will seeing will in a sentence doesn't necessarily immediately read as a command, but students should read these as commands in order to make sense of them. And also the fact that in a syllabus, this is a form of command also explains why it's so common across syllabi. Same with will be expected to, right? So basically syllabi are mostly written as contracts, and they need to be read that way in order to make sense of them. And the amounts of passive voice, the amounts of sentences that include will be able to, the repetitive word choices and chunks, again, chunks are multi-word units that you see on syllabi make more sense in light of their the document's existence as a type of, pseudo contract. So the problems from my perspective, because again, I teach mostly international students, are that syllabi are incredibly lexically dense. And that's, more of a me problem than a you problem. Again, assuming I'm not speaking to other ESL teachers here. It's a problem that requires special attention just because syllabi are sometimes expected to be read by instructors. That's a good example of passive voice there. So some instructors really want students to read the syllabi closely. Some don't care as much, but you never know what kind of instructor you're going to get as an undergraduate, right? And I don't think Rate My Professor usually includes like whether instructors expect people to read the syllabi or not. Importantly for me, though, they're lexically dense in a way that's not the same as the kind of reading I would normally expect them to do, even at the higher levels of the intensive English program. As we saw, the words like concept are much more common across syllabi than in academic writing in general. So if a student did fairly well in reading academic articles before they started their undergrad years or their undergrad programs, they still might not be prepared for just how particular and idiosyncratic syllabi are in terms of their lexical density. Possible solution, and I'll leave some of this for the Q&As after the presentation, but you can sometimes simply replace difficult words with easier words and leave the readability intact. This isn't necessarily dumbing down, but choosing words that students are more likely to have encountered, even domestic students, right? Opt is a fairly rare verb. Choose is a fairly common verb. And in this case, they mean basically the same thing. So what are you losing by simplifying it, you know? You can also, let's say, the passive voice can be a problem just in the fact that, I mean, at the end of an IEP, students have definitely encountered passive voice before, and sometimes, I want to say more often than not, have had a couple explicit lessons about passive voice. But they might not be prepared for just how commonly syllabi use passive voice, and then the particular ways it always uses passive voice, which is sentences like will be required to, will be expected to, the required text. They're using, you know, the past participle of a verb require basically as an adjective, which is something that happens a lot in the let's see, in yeah, basically in syllabi. So you can switch these to active voice, and here there might be a compromise between the intentions of the writer and the readability for the reader. So switching a sentence like students that's an interesting one. Students will be expected to you need to. Let's see. It changes the not just the meaning. Well, it doesn't change the meaning that much. It changes the register, the formality level of the document down quite a bit. And I don't know, professors may need to think about making that compromise. It's not obvious that that is a compromise that needs to be made, but it would definitely increase the readability of syllabi. Now, the last point here is something that I do think it behooves instructors to, speaking of lexically dense sentences, it behooves instructors to walk through the syllabi with their students, taking some time out of the first class or the first week of classes to do so, just because the purpose of a syllabus is not clear always to students, especially international students. And there might be some sentence hidden in the middle of a syllabus that you think everyone should definitely read, whereas you don't necessarily care if they read the schedule, or the schedule is subject to revision anyway, but the late work policy is not. If there are sentences like that in the syllabi that you intend to be strictly binding on your behavior and the student's behavior, I think it's fair to walk through those in class, right? Especially for first year courses, and especially in courses that have, yeah, basically first year courses have a reasonable chance of being a student's first college class, right? And that, again, applies not just to international students, but maybe especially for international students. All right. So here's my works cited page. How did I do on time? I probably went over. Yeah, 17 and a half minutes, not too much over. So let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.